I paid for my daughter-in-law's nursing degree, and 11 years later she used everything I taught her about medicine to convince a judge I couldn't take care of myself. That's the part that still doesn't let me sleep, not the money, not the house. The fact that I'm the one who handed her the exact vocabulary she used to take my life apart. My name is Harold Whitfield. I'm 68 years old. I spent 36 years as an electrician up in Erie, Pennsylvania, wiring houses and factories in weather that would put most men in the ground early. My hands still remember every job. I raised one son, Bradley, mostly alone after his mother passed when he was 9. It was just the two of us in a narrow house on Parade Street for a long time, me coming home smelling like copper and sweat, him doing homework at the kitchen table under a bulb I'd rewired myself, so it wouldn't flicker while he read. What keeps me up now isn't grief over Diane, my late wife. I made peace with that a long time ago. What keeps me up is the woman my son married, and the 18 months where I mistook her attention for love, right up until the night a home health aide named Rosa pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand at my own kitchen table and told me, in a voice barely above breath, to say I was dizzy and needed to lie down immediately. I need you to sit with me a minute before I get to that part, because you have to understand who I was before any of this happened, the same way I had to understand it myself, sitting in a courtroom hallway with my hands shaking, wondering how a man who spent his whole life reading blueprints missed every single wire crossed right in front of him. 3 years ago, my heart started acting up. Nothing dramatic at first, just a flutter here and there, a tightness climbing stairs I used to take 2 at a time. My doctor called it atrial fibrillation and put me on blood thinners and a beta blocker, and told me, not unkindly, that a man my age living alone should have somebody checking on him regularly. I brushed it off the way men like me always do. I'd wired substations. I wasn't going to let a flutter in my chest turn me into somebody's project. Bradley had married Vanessa 4 years before that. She'd trained as a licensed practical nurse, worked private duty cases around Erie County, mostly elderly clients, and I liked her well enough at first. She was quick with a joke, good at holding a room, the kind of woman who remembers everybody's birthday and shows up with the right kind of pie. When my heart started giving me trouble, it was Vanessa who noticed before anybody else, Vanessa who sat me down and said, "Harold, I've seen this 100 times in my patients. You need someone with medical training keeping an eye on you, not just Bradley stopping by on weekends. I want to be honest with you the way I wasn't honest with myself back then." Part of what made me trust her wasn't just her kindness, it was pride. I had put her through nursing school. When she and Bradley got married, money was tight, and she'd told me, crying at my kitchen table, that she'd always wanted to finish her LPN license, but her own family never had 2 dimes to spare for it. I paid for it myself, every semester. Out of the pension, I'd built wiring commercial buildings for 3 decades. I told myself I was helping my son's wife build a future. I never once imagined I was building the exact toolkit she'd use against me. She started coming by twice a week, checking my blood pressure, organizing my pill bottles into one of those days-of-the-week containers, listening to my heart with a stethoscope she kept in her car. She talked to my cardiologist directly, using the kind of language that made the receptionist put her straight through instead of making her wait on hold like the rest of us. I watched her do it and felt something like relief wash over me. The specific relief of a man who has spent his whole life being the one who takes care of things, finally letting somebody else hold the wrench for a while. 6 weeks into this, she brought over a folder one Thursday evening while Bradley was working a late shift at the plant. She set it down on my kitchen table with a gentleness that I understand now was rehearsed, though at the time it looked like nothing but care. "Harold," she said, "I need to talk to you about something serious, and I need you to really listen because I love you like my own father. And I am terrified of what happens if something goes wrong with your heart and there's nobody with authority to make decisions fast." She opened the folder. "Healthcare power of attorney documents. If something happens and you can't speak for yourself," she said, "I need to be the one making the calls to the hospital, the one who understands your medications, your history, everything. Bradley loves you, but he panics, Harold. You know he panics. I don't. I need this paperwork to protect you." I looked at those papers the way I used to look at electrical panels I already half trusted, checking for something wrong but wanting so badly to find nothing that I probably didn't look hard enough. My eyes weren't what they used to be. The print was small. My chest had been tight all week from the humidity, and I was tired in that particular way where your judgment goes soft at the edges before you even notice it slipping. I signed it. She had it notarized 2 days later, at a UPS store off Peach Street, mentioned it to me afterward like she was telling me she'd picked up milk. And I slept that night with something close to gratitude in my chest, thinking I had finally found the daughter I never had, a woman smart enough and caring enough to stand between me and whatever was coming for my heart. What I had actually done was hand her a legal foothold into every decision that would ever be made about my body. Now I want you to carry that piece of paper forward with me through 14 months, because everything I'm about to describe, every kind visit, every organized pill box, every phone call to my doctor that saved me an afternoon of waiting rooms, I need you to hold it next to one fact I didn't learn until much later. 3 weeks after I signed that healthcare power of attorney, Vanessa began quietly documenting something in a private notebook she kept in her car. Not my blood pressure readings, not my medications, my confusion. She started writing down things that never happened. A conversation about paying a bill twice that I never had. A moment where I supposedly forgot my own grandson's name at a 4th of July cookout, when what actually happened was I called my grandson Tyler by his cousin's name for half a second, because they were standing side by side in matching shirts. And I was half a second slow, the way anyone is half a second slow sometimes. She wrote these things down like a nurse charting symptoms, and every entry was a brick in a wall she was building, one I couldn't see from my side of it. Around month 5, my flutter turned into something worse. A real episode, 3 in the morning, my heart racing so hard I thought it would come up through my throat. I called Bradley, who called Vanessa, who came over in her scrubs, looking every bit the competent professional, monitored me, decided against the hospital, sat with me till dawn. My doctor later said she'd made exactly the right call, that I'd been in a manageable arrhythmia and the ER would have just meant hours of waiting for the same outcome. I thanked God for her that whole week. I told my neighbor, Earl Dunmire, that my daughter-in-law was an angel wearing scrubs. Here's what I didn't know while I was singing her praises to Earl over the fence. Vanessa had already started making calls of her own, not to my doctor, to an elder law attorney 2 towns over in Meadville, a man named Preston Argyle who specialized in conservatorship and guardianship petitions. She'd been consulting him for 2 months by then, laying out a story of an aging widower with a serious cardiac condition, episodes of confusion, no spouse, and an adult son too emotionally close and too busy with work to manage his father's care properly. Every visit she made to my house after that call wasn't just kindness anymore. It was fieldwork. It was evidence gathering dressed up as love. Now run the clock forward through those 14 months with me. Pillboxes organized every Sunday. Doctor's appointments where she did the talking while I nodded along, grateful not to have to explain my own symptoms twice. A good stretch in the spring where I felt strong enough to redo the wiring in my own garage, laughing with Bradley about how his old man still had it, and a bad stretch in the fall where my heart skipped so violently I had to sit down on my own porch steps and put my head between my knees until it passed. 14 months of trusting the one person in my life who seemed to actually understand what was happening inside my chest. Then came a Sunday dinner that split my life clean in half. It was at Bradley and Vanessa's place, a rancher out past the fairgrounds, my granddaughter Chloe running around with a paper crown from a birthday party earlier that week, the smell of pot roast filling up the whole house. My daughter, Marissa, had driven up from Pittsburgh with her husband, David, a soft-spoken man who worked as a pharmacist at a hospital there, the kind of man you'd forget was even in the room until the exact moment you desperately needed him to be. There was Rosa, too, the home health aide Vanessa had recently hired through an agency to help watch me during the days Vanessa worked her hospital shifts, a quiet Puerto Rican woman in her 50s who'd been coming to my house 3 afternoons a week for about 6 weeks by then. Vanessa was in fine form that night, telling a story about a difficult patient, topping off wine glasses, laughing loud enough to fill the whole kitchen, radiating the warmth of a woman with absolutely nothing sitting on her conscience. I was having a good evening myself, feeling steady, enjoying my granddaughter's paper crown sliding sideways down her forehead, when Rosa leaned past me to refill the bread basket and pressed a small folded napkin into my hand under the table. I didn't understand at first. I unfolded it in my lap, careful not to draw eyes. 6 words in pencil. Say you feel dizzy. Leave now. Below it, smaller, don't tell Vanessa I gave you this. I looked up at Rosa. She wasn't looking at me at all, already moving back toward the stove, her face perfectly composed, the face of a woman who had been carrying something heavy and finally decided to set it down. I understood the look even before I understood the words. Trust me. Don't ask questions right now. Just trust me. I put my hand flat against my chest, the same spot where my heart had been giving me trouble for 3 years, and said, Lo, I don't feel right. Something's off. Marissa was up out of her chair before I even finished the sentence. Real worry all over her face, because she'd watched me have a bad episode once before and knew exactly what to look for. David, quiet as ever, was already reaching for his car keys. Vanessa looked briefly, genuinely concerned, which I understand now cost her nothing, because concern was a costume she'd learned to put on and take off as easily as her scrub jacket. Feel better, Harold, she called out as David walked me to his car. I'll swing by tomorrow and check your pressure. David didn't drive me toward the hospital. He drove 2 exits down and pulled into the parking lot of the pharmacy where he worked, dark and empty on a Sunday evening, unlocked the side door with his own key, and led me back to a small break room in the back. He sat me down at a folding table under fluorescent lights and looked at me the way you look at someone right before you tell them something they can never unknow. Harold, he said. And he'd never once called me by my first name in the 11 years he'd been married to my daughter. It was always Dad. I need you to understand that everything I'm about to tell you, I've had checked 3 separate ways. I didn't come to you with a guess. I came to you with proof. How long have you known? I asked him. 2 months, he said. 2 months. I let that number sit in me a while. I wasn't angry yet. Not yet, because the look on his face told me those 2 months had cost him plenty of sleep too. Why did you wait so long to say something? I asked. Because Marissa needed to be absolutely certain before we tore her sister-in-law apart in front of her father, he said. And because I needed every piece of this locked down solid before you ever suspected a thing was wrong, I nodded. I understood him completely, the same way I used to understand a wiring diagram the moment all the connections finally clicked into place. Then he opened a folder he'd had waiting on that table, and my whole life turned over. He started with the notebook. A pharmacy tech he supervised was Rosa's cousin, and it was Rosa, quietly horrified by what she'd been asked to help document, who had first shown David a photograph of pages from Vanessa's private notes, taken with her own phone, one afternoon while Vanessa stepped out to take a call. Entries stretching back nearly a year, fabricated moments of confusion, exaggerated versions of ordinary forgetfulness that every person my age experiences from time to time. A whole invented pattern of cognitive decline, built one small lie at a time, the way you lay brick after brick until you've built a wall nobody standing on the other side of it can even see. This has a name, David said, sliding the first printed page across the table to me. It's called manufactured incapacity, and attorneys who specialize in elder guardianship see it more than you'd think. It's the foundation you build before you go to a judge. Then came the attorney. Vanessa had been meeting with Preston Argyle for 4 months, not 2, laying the legal groundwork for a full guardianship petition, one that would grant her exclusive control over my medical decisions, my finances, my house, everything. She'd been quietly gathering supporting statements, too. Casual remarks dropped at church, at the hardware store, in the produce aisle at Giant Eagle, to neighbors and old coworkers of mine. Things like, Harold's really struggling since his heart trouble started. I worry about him living alone. He's had some confused moments I don't like to talk about. Small, worried comments, planted like seeds in the minds of people who'd known me 30 years, so that when the petition finally reached a courtroom, there'd already be a chorus of concerned voices ready to back her up without even realizing they'd been recruited months in advance. I looked at those pages laid out across the table like evidence at a trial, because that's precisely what they were. My own daughter-in-law had built a case against my mind with the same careful, patient discipline I'd spent 36 years using to make sure a building's wiring wouldn't fail under pressure. She'd learned that discipline from watching real nursing work. She'd learned patience from every long shift she'd ever pulled at a bedside, and she turned every bit of it against the man who paid for her license. Then came the house. Buried in that healthcare power of attorney I'd signed at my own kitchen table was a clause, standard boilerplate that a good attorney would have flagged in 5 minutes, granting the healthcare agent expanded authority to arrange, quote, appropriate residential care, including relocation of the principal, if the agent determined such action necessary for the principal's welfare. Vanessa's attorney had already drafted paperwork to have that clause interpreted broadly enough to move me into a memory care facility the moment a judge signed off on the guardianship. A facility, David told me, quietly, that Vanessa had already toured twice. My house on Parade Street, paid off in full after 30 years of mortgage payments, would then fall under her financial guardianship to manage, rent, or sell as she saw fit, with the proceeds earmarked, on paper, for the cost of my own care. I put both hands flat on that folding table and just looked at them a while. Old hands. Hands that spliced wires in buildings all over 3 counties and never once caused a fire, and had signed away, on one exhausted Thursday evening, the key to my entire life. There's one more thing, David said, and this is the part that decided everything for me. Vanessa had scheduled the guardianship hearing for 3 weeks out. She'd lined up 2 witnesses from the neighborhood, primed with those seated remarks, ready to testify to a pattern of confusion they'd only half noticed and had been gently encouraged to notice more. She had Preston Argyle prepared to present the fabricated notebook, sanitized and typed up as clinical observation notes, to make it look like the careful documentation of a concerned medical professional rather than what it actually was, a fiction built one convenient lie at a time. "How did you find all this?" I asked him. "Rosa came to me first," he said. "She couldn't sleep with what she was being asked to help cover up. Then I brought in a colleague of mine, a pharmacist who does expert consulting on elder capacity cases. He looked at the whole file and told me flat out, 'This isn't medical documentation, this is a script.'" My phone buzzed on the table. "Marissa." David answered it and set it on speaker. Her voice came through, carefully controlled, the voice of a woman holding herself together through sheer will and barely managing it. She said Chloe was down for the night, the dinner had wrapped up normal as anything, Vanessa had asked twice how I was feeling, playing the worried daughter-in-law right down to the last syllable. Then, Marissa went quiet a second. "Dad," she said softly, "Vanessa just told Bradley you probably shouldn't be driving much longer." She said it so gently. She said it like she loves you. Nobody spoke for a moment. I thought about what it had cost my daughter to sit in that kitchen and hear her sister-in-law lay another brick in the wall without even raising her voice. Marissa had liked Vanessa for years, defended her when extended family whispered that she'd married Bradley a little too fast, a little too eager for what came with the Whitfield name. And Vanessa had used every ounce of that goodwill as cover while she quietly built a legal case to take my house and my voice at the same time. Then David asked me, quiet, almost to himself, "What do you want to do, Harold?" Here's the thing about being 68 years old. Sitting in the back room of a pharmacy on a Sunday night with a folder full of proof that the woman you trusted has been planning to take your whole life out from under you. You've got 2 roads in front of you. You can be loud. You can drive straight to that rancher out past the fairgrounds and say every true and furious thing sitting in your chest, looking for the door. Or you can be something quieter, something colder, something that actually protects what's left. I thought about the guardianship hearing 3 weeks out. I thought about the memory care facility she'd already toured twice without my knowledge. I thought about my house on Parade Street, every wire in it strung by my own 2 hands. "I want every door closed before she knows a single one was ever open," I told David. "Not for me. For Bradley, so he doesn't have to be the one who exposes his own wife in a courtroom he never saw coming. I want it done clean, and I want it done first." He nodded once. He already had the beginning of a plan. Monday morning, I sat in the office of an elder law attorney named Sandra Wycliffe, recommended by David's colleague, 15 minutes from my house. She went through Vanessa's healthcare power of attorney, the way a good electrician traces a short, methodical, patient, until she found exactly where it had been wired wrong. By that afternoon, the document was formally revoked, filed, and recorded with my cardiologist's office and every hospital in the county. Sandra then helped me execute a new, narrow, carefully worded power of attorney naming Bradley alone, with explicit language closing off any relocation authority whatsoever. Vanessa lost every scrap of medical decision-making power over me before she'd even finished her Monday shift. She had no idea. By midweek, Sandra had also filed a formal objection with the county, along with a sworn statement from Rosa and photographic evidence of the fabricated notebook entries, effectively burying the guardianship petition before it ever reached a judge's desk. Sandra told me herself it was the cleanest pre-petition file she'd seen come across her desk in 15 years of elder law practice. Then Vanessa came by the house Wednesday evening, Same as always, checking my pressure, organizing my pillbox, asking how I'd been feeling since the scare at dinner. Much better, I told her. Just needed some rest. You've got to take it easy, Harold, she said. I worry about you. I looked at my son's wife across my own kitchen table, the same table where she'd once cried about wanting to finish nursing school, the same table where she'd later slid a folder in front of me and called it protection. I thought about the notebook full of lies. I thought about the facility she'd already walked through twice. I picked up my coffee and I said, "You're right. From here on out, I'm going to start paying very close attention to everything." She smiled and nodded, looking pleased with herself, having no notion of what was already closing in around her in the dark. And here's where I have to be honest with you about my son's wife, because I promised myself when I started telling this story that I'd tell it true and not just easy. I don't believe Vanessa woke up one morning and decided to become a woman who steals a man's whole life out from under him. I think it started small. I think she told herself she deserved something for all the caretaking she genuinely did do. I think she looked at a paid-off house and a comfortable pension and told herself she was the responsible one, the one who understood medicine, the one who'd actually earned the right to make these decisions eventually anyway, so why not now, while she was already doing all the work? I think every fabricated notebook entry had a story she told herself to make it feel almost true. And every one of those stories made the next one just a little bit easier to write. That's the part that frightens me most. Not that she was some kind of monster. That she was a woman who talked herself into it one reasonable-sounding justification at a time. The following Sunday, I called Bradley myself. "Son," I said, "I'm feeling a whole lot better. Come to dinner this weekend, here at my place. Bring Vanessa. We've got plenty to be grateful for." They arrived at 6 with a bottle of wine and Vanessa's warmest smile. The table was set carefully. Marissa and David came too, and Chloe wore her paper crown again, a little more crushed than the week before. I'd made a roast the way Diane used to make it, and for a moment, sitting there with my whole family around that table, it almost felt like an ordinary Sunday, the kind I used to take for granted before any of this began. Vanessa was radiant, telling a story about a difficult patient at the hospital, pouring wine before anyone asked, laughing loud at her own jokes, every inch the golden daughter-in-law, like the last 14 months had never happened at all. And then, partway through the meal, there was a knock at my front door. I stood up. I walked across my own floors, through 30 years of my own home, and opened it. Sandra Wycliffe stood there with a county investigator from Adult Protective Services and a second man who introduced himself as a detective from the district attorney's elder fraud unit. Calm, unhurried, paperwork in hand. I'd met with all three of them 2 days before. They knew exactly why they'd come and exactly who they'd come for. I heard Vanessa's laughter cut off mid-sentence behind me. I stepped aside and let them in, and I watched my daughter-in-law's face in the exact moment she understood. "I want to tell you something, because this part matters more than anything else in this whole story." There was no shame on her face first. Not even then. Her eyes went fast around that room, to Bradley, to me, to Marissa, hunting for some door that wasn't there anymore, because every door had already been closed days before she ever walked into my house that evening. Bradley stood up slowly. He'd been turning over what he wanted to say to her for 2 full days, cutting it down, stripping it back. And when the moment finally arrived, he found it simpler than anything he'd rehearsed. "Look at Dad before you say one more word, Vanessa," he said, quiet, no shake in his voice at all. "Just look at him." The room went completely still. Vanessa looked at me, and I looked back at her, with nothing on my face but the truth, plain and finished. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She asked, in a small voice, "How long have you known?" And Bradley answered for me. "Long enough," he said, "to make sure you never got the chance to finish what you started." They walked her out to the detective's car right off my own front porch, past the flower bed Diane planted the year before she died, past the mailbox I'd rewired the light on myself so Bradley could read the numbers, coming home late from second shift as a boy. Chloe watched from the window, too young to understand any of it, waving at her mother the way children wave at anyone leaving, without knowing yet what leaving sometimes means. Vanessa was charged with attempted fraud, forgery related to falsified medical documentation, and elder exploitation under Pennsylvania law. Facing the weight of Rosa's sworn testimony, the photographed notebook pages, and Sandra's airtight filing, she took a plea agreement rather than risk trial. 3 years probation, a permanent revocation of her nursing license, and a restitution order covering the cost of every legal fee I'd had to pay to protect myself. Though I told the court plainly that money was never the point of any of this for me. Bradley filed for divorce 2 weeks later. It nearly broke him, watching the woman he'd built a life with turn out to be someone entirely different underneath the parts he'd loved. Some days, I still catch him staring at nothing at my kitchen table, doing the same arithmetic I did that Sunday night in the pharmacy break room, trying to figure out which parts of 11 years were real and which parts were just very good performances. I don't have an answer for him. I don't think anybody does. My house on Parade Street is still mine, every wire in it still exactly where I put it. My cardiologist has my new power of attorney on file, held by Bradley alone, with language so narrow and specific that Sandra told me it could survive a challenge from the best guardianship attorney in the state. Rosa still comes by twice a week, not through any agency now, just as a friend, and some Sundays she stays for dinner and tells Chloe stories about her own grandchildren back in San Juan. This is what the last 14 months taught me, and I'd hand it to you across this table if I could. The danger almost never looks like danger. It looks like someone who finally understands your medical chart better than you do. It looks like relief, arriving at the exact moment you're too tired to keep carrying everything yourself. And the mistake I made, the one so many of us make, is believing that gratitude is a good enough reason to stop reading what you sign. It isn't, not ever. So here's the one thing I want you to do today before you close this and go on with your evening. If anyone holds legal authority over your medical decisions, your money, or your home, anyone at all, even someone you'd swear your own life on, go find that document tonight and read every single word of it again with fresh eyes. Not because you don't trust them, because trust and verification were never supposed to be enemies. And here's the question I want you to sit with tonight. If the person you trusted most to protect your body was quietly building the case to take your whole life away, would you have the strength to close every door before they ever knew one was open? I don't know for certain that I had it in me. I just knew I had to find it, because nobody else was going to find it for me. I want to hear from you, because I read every single comment. Tell me, neighbors, would you have confronted her right there at that dinner table, or would you have done it the quiet way, the way I did? And tell me where in this country you're watching from tonight, because I love knowing how far a story like this one travels. If anyone you loved ever turned your trust into a tool against you, tell me about it below. You won't be the only one in that comment section, not even close. If this one moved you, do an old electrician a kindness and hit subscribe and tap that like button on your way out. We tell true, hard, family stories here, plain and honest, and having you here with me tonight is the whole reason I keep telling them. I'll see you on the next one. Thank you, truly.